Munchausen Syndrome by Proxy. Munchausen Syndrome by Proxy, also known as factitious disorder imposed on another, is a condition in which a caregiver creates the appearance of health problems in another person, typically their child. The individual may injure the child. They may alter test samples. They then present the person to somebody else as being sick or injured. It's reported that the cause of Munchausen syndrome or factitious disorder imposed on another is unknown, and where I have seen reports about it, there has been something of a confusion as to what the primary motive is, with some commentators stating that the primary motive may be to gain attention and manipulate physicians. Invariably, those who are affected by the disorder have been subjected to a form of physical abuse and medical neglect. And it's usually children that are affected by this, although it can also occur with an elderly person and sometimes another adult, although that is unusual. Essentially, the caregiver makes a dependent person appear mentally or physically ill in order to gain attention. To perpetuate the medical relationship, the caregiver systematically misrepresents symptoms, fabricates signs, manipulates laboratory tests, or even purposely harms the dependent individual, for instance, by causing poisoning, suffocation, infection, or physical injury. Studies have indicated that there is a mortality rate of between 6 and 10%, and therefore it has been suggested that it is perhaps the most lethal form of abuse. Of course, those who've been on the receiving end of abuse from a narcissist, whether it's physical, sexual, emotional, financial, psychological, isolation from friends and family, will attest to the detrimental impact that it has had upon them. Whilst narcissists can and do kill people, that is actually very rare, as I've explained in the video Why the Narcissist Wants You Dead. Yes, it happens, but that is not usually the intended aim of the narcissist for the reasons that I've explained in that video. And therefore, the fact that with Munchausen syndrome by proxy, the lethality rate is greater is evident cause for concern. However, the relevant surveys and studies fail to identify what is actually occurring. The fact is that this behaviour, which of course is a form of abuse, is likely, but not exclusively, to be undertaken by narcissists. The reason for this, of course, is that it's about the assertion of control and the drawing of fuel, possibly character traits and possibly residual benefits. Information about this condition states that, aside from the motive, most commonly attributed to be a gain in attention or sympathy, another feature that differentiates Munchausen syndrome by proxy from typical, in inverted commas, physical child abuse is the degree of premeditation involved. Whereas most physical abuse entails lashing out at a child in response to some behaviour, for example crying, bedwetting, spilling food, assaults on the victim of Munchausen syndrome by proxy tend to be unprovoked and demonstrate a degree of planning. Where a child is abused by an individual, for instance, is smacked, that doesn't mean that a narcissist is involved. Any parent, as a consequence of external stressors, lack of sleep, the monotony of routine, and of course other medical conditions which can occur related to or separate from pregnancy can result in a diminution of that individual's emotional empathy towards the child, resulting in behaviour which would be deemed abusive. However, it is not habitual, systematic or patterned, and therefore would not fall within the remit of the behaviour of a narcissist. Many of you who are adult child of narcissists listening to this will recall the instances of abuse that you suffered at the hands of a parent, whereby you were perhaps physically beaten, you were excluded from activities, you were put down, you had no privacy, you were told that you weren't good enough, you may have suffered sexual molestation. There's a whole range of behaviours that will have occurred, invariably perpetrated by narcissists as a consequence of the need to assert control over the child through a variety of different means. With Munchausen Syndrome by Proxy, this is largely, although not exclusively, a behaviour that would be undertaken by the narcissist. Why? First of all, the fact that harm is being occasioned to a vulnerable vulnerable individual, most likely a child or an elderly person, exhibits an absence of emotional empathy. It demonstrates a sense of entitlement to behave towards that person in the particular way. It is evidence of objectification of that person, treating them as a device that is used for the gratification of what the narcissist requires. It exhibits a lack of accountability with regard to the narcissist's own behaviour, a lack of accountability towards the individual who is being affected by it. It exhibits a boundary transgression, and of course is a form of manipulation. Why is it being done? It is being done to assert control. First of all, it is being done to assert control over the child, or the other type of victim that exists. It's also being done to draw fuel from that individual. However, it goes further. There is triangulation, because invariably what will happen is that the narcissist is seeking to assert control over the relevant doctor, medical provider, by presenting the child with particular symptoms and saying, look, they have this rash or this injury, or that they continue to vomit. And in the circumstances, that compels the doctor to act. Thus, the narcissist has been able to assert control over that individual and draw fuel from the response. Material describes that a unique aspect of this form of abuse is the role that healthcare providers play by actively, albeit unintentionally, enabling the abuse. The relevant doctor or medical practitioner reacts to the concerns and demands of the relevant perpetrator, and therefore they are manipulated into a partnership of child maltreatment. Challenging cases that defy simple medical explanations may well prompt healthcare providers to pursue unusual or rare diagnoses, thus allocating even more time to the child and the abuser, which then means that the abuser, the narcissist, is gaining more fuel and is more readily asserting control. Even without prompting, medical professionals may be easily seduced into prescribing diagnostic tests and therapies that are at best uncomfortable and costly and potentially injurious to the child. If the health practitioner resists ordering further tests, drugs, procedures, surgeries or specialists, of course, then in such circumstances that threatens the control of the narcissist, who then responds to that threat by trying to nullify it by threatening to issue proceedings, or, in some instances, searching out another provider. And therefore, it is common for perpetrators of Munchausen syndrome by proxy to switch medical providers frequently until they find one that is willing to meet their level of need, something that's known as doctor shopping. It's similar where the narcissist keeps firing their lawyer with regard to perhaps an ongoing dispute, say a divorce, because the lawyer isn't doing or is advising to contrary to what the narcissist believes is right. And therefore, that threatens the narcissist's control. And in order to nullify that threat to the control, the narcissist disposes of the advisor, therefore asserting control by active withdrawal, and seeks out somebody else instead. This behaviour, as I say, is not exclusive to that of narcissists, but in most instances it will be something that is perpetrated by narcissists because it fits with the absence of emotional empathy, the desire to assert control over appliances, the necessity of gathering fuel. There might be residual benefits, for instance with regard to payment or the provision of drugs. It also provides a basis for triangulation with other members of, say, the family. I keep taking little Johnny and the doctor can't find out what's wrong. What do you think it might be? And people express concern, thus allowing the assertion of control by the narcissist over them by their sympathetic response and the provision of fuel. Now, of course, it was mentioned earlier that it involves a degree of planning in order to carry out the act. But understand that because most narcissists operate instinctively, they know that they are performing an act where they are purposefully poisoning the child, for example. But what they don't realise is the real reason they are doing this. When it comes to the unaware aspect of narcissists, many people struggle to understand this point. That when I say the individual doesn't know what they're doing, it doesn't mean that they're an automaton and they're oblivious to the fact, for instance, that they have just injured somebody, punched them in the face, or called them horrible names. They know they've done that. They are unconscious to the real reason behind it. That is the unawareness of which I speak. Lesser narcissists often do things without even realizing that what they're doing is inappropriate, which of course seems extraordinary, but that's why when you confront them, you are met with a blank look. They really don't realize that they're doing something that is wrong, and they carry on in that wrecking ball behavior, doing exactly as they please, as they see, in order to achieve the prime aims, although they don't know it. In other instances, they may realize what they are doing, and there is a very rudimentary explanation. Simply, because I can, because I'm the boss. Why not? And there is no subtlety or sophistication. So they know that they've hit somebody, but they don't know that the reason they did that was to assert control and draw fuel. Mid-range narcissists also know what they are doing, and they will also recognize that some people describe what they're doing as wrong, but it remains justified. And similarly, in their world, they see that they are the victim, and therefore they are responding to the behavior for the purposes of the assertion of control, drawing fuel, and possibly character traits and residual benefits, but they don't know this. So the mid-range narcissist isn't unaware that he is giving a silent treatment. He is unaware as to the real reason he is doing it. The mid-range narcissist is not aware that he has just called his wife horrible names, but he's unaware as to the real reason why he is doing this. Similarly, a mid-range narcissist will know that they have purposely put something unpleasant in the food of their child and fed it to the child to make them unwell, but they don't know the reason why they are doing it. The reason they are doing it is to assert control over the child and also provide the basis of asserting control over a relevant medical provider, to draw fuel from both, and possibly character traits and residual benefits. So, for example, they can then utilize the ill health of the child to triangulate with friends and family members to express false concern. In the moment that they express that false concern, they do not stand there knowing that they have actually poisoned the child. In that instant, they honestly believe that the child is unwell. And they don't sit there thinking, I know I've poisoned them, but I'm talking bullshit. The way that the narcissism operates is that at the time they poisoned them, they knew that they were doing it, but they didn't know why. And then at a later juncture, when they present, in that moment, they are convinced by the narcissism to make it effective enough to assert control, that they are unaware of the reasons behind why they're doing what they're doing, and that they will say, I don't know why he keeps getting unwell. Can you find out for me? There will be some narcissists that are aware that not only know the reason why they are doing this, because they are doing it to assert control, and when they sit and present before the medical practitioner, they know full well why the child is ill because they've caused it, but they are able, as a consequence of the particular type of narcissist that they are, to do this callously without any sense of remorse or guilt, in the full knowledge that they are telling a lie, because they are an aware narcissist. The behaviour of Munchausen syndrome by proxy is most often something that is undertaken by a narcissist because it fits with the fact that to do this exhibits an absence of emotional empathy for a particularly vulnerable individual. It exhibits a lack of emotional empathy for somebody who is invariably under the care and dependent upon the narcissist. It exhibits a sense of entitlement to treat that person that way. It exhibits an absence of accountability with regard to the behaviour of the narcissist and towards the dependent. It evidences boundary transgression to cause them to suffer poisoning or suffocation or infection or physical injury. It exhibits manipulation of that person in a rudimentary way by poisoning, suffocation, etc., and then manipulation by way of triangulation of other parties, most notably the medical practitioner. It demonstrates the pursuit of the prime aims of fuel, control, character traits, and residual benefits. It demonstrates part of the narcissistic dynamic with regard to that pursuit. It might also be with regard to facade management, appearing to care. And therefore, in such circumstances, this behaviour is very much that of the narcissist. Of course, dealing with this means no contact, and the child being removed, or the other vulnerable person being removed. Potentially using video surveillance to spy on the suspected perpetrator so that there is key evidence that can then be utilised within the formality of proceedings to have the vulnerable individual removed from the abuser, and thereafter invariably the dependent's condition improves because they are no longer being poisoned, suffocated, infected, etc. The fact is that although there are some instances where Munchausen syndrome by proxy could be imposed, for instance, by somebody that has suffered an erosion of emotional empathy, for instance, they may have suffered postnatal depression, and therefore, for a sustained period of time, they engage in this behaviour because their emotional empathy has been eroded by the lingering depression. More usually, this is a consequence of the behaviours of a narcissist, and it's apparent from the reading that I have done that this is not mentioned, and it is, again, a gap in the knowledge with regard to the behaviours of a narcissist towards both an individual who is vulnerable and also the relevant medical practitioner. It also shows, of course, a lack of emotional empathy towards the medical practitioner, absorbing their time and expertise upon essentially a false case. And the medical practitioner, either narcissist or empath, is driven to help. The narcissist medical practitioner, not wanting to be outdone by this mystery illness, which of course represents a challenge to their control, continues to indulge the other narcissist by trying to get to the root of the problem. An empathic medical practitioner, of course, truly cares and wants to help, unaware that they are being duped by a narcissist, and of course, in such circumstances, their own addiction is being affected by the interaction with this narcissist, causing them to miss what is actually going on. The fact remains that the majority of these cases fit with the modus operandi of a narcissist and the relevant victims. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.